All right, so get ready because we're going to be diving into some fascinating source material for this deep dive. We've got a series of audio recordings, and these recordings feature two guys. And let's just say these guys are self-proclaimed masters of something called speed seduction.
A speed seduction.
Yeah, so
All right.
we're going to be breaking down their techniques. We're going to be exploring the psychology behind them and, seeing what insights we can glean from their approach.
Well, it's interesting here. You listen to these guys. One of the things that really comes through is this emphasis on testing and observation. It's not about, just throwing out random lines or hoping for the best. It's about constantly gauging a woman's reactions and
Yeah.
adjusting their approach based on the feedback they're getting.
Yeah, they even compare it to like cybernetics, those self-regulating systems that use feedback to achieve a desired outcome.
Right, exactly. It's like they're saying, look, if you're not paying attention to the feedback you're getting, you're essentially operating in the dark.
So what does this testing actually look like in practice? I mean, they give some pretty interesting examples. One guy talks about like subtly invading personal space to see how a woman reacts. Like, does she lean in or does she pull back?
Right. It's all about those subtle cues.
Yeah, exactly.
They also talk about testing through small gestures like holding hands or whispering something in her ear. And they're even paying attention to things like how she responds to him holding doors or paying for coffee.
It's like they're trying to pick up on all these little indicators of her comfort level and her interest.
Right. And it's not just about, you know, passing or failing a test. It's about using that information to kind of steer the interaction in the direction they want it to go.
And they're not afraid to get creative with their testing. There's this one example that I thought was pretty funny. One of the guys is having lunch with a woman, and she puts down a dollar tip for the waiter. And as it turns out, she was actually watching to see if he would add to it. It was like a test to see if he was cheap or not.
Oh, wow.
Talk about reading into things.
Yeah, it really highlights the fact that, there's a lot going on beneath the surface in these interactions. Both men and women are constantly observing and assessing, even if they're not always consciously aware of it.
Okay, so once they've kind of gotten a read on the situation, these guys move on to what they call eliminating resistance. And this is where things get really interesting. They use these elaborate guided fantasies to get a woman in the mood.
It's about painting this really vivid picture with words, creating a scenario that's designed to evoke a strong, emotional, and let's just say a sensual response.
And we're not talking about your typical dinner and a movie type of fantasies here. These are full-on sensory experiences. Like one example involves a sensual massage on a beach. Another one is about rollerblading that leads to a passionate encounter.
Wow.
I mean, they really get into it.
And what's interesting is how they emphasize active participation. It's not just about telling a story. It's about encouraging the woman to kind of build the fantasies with him, adding her own details and preferences.
So it becomes this collaborative exercise in imagination and desire.
Exactly. And by getting her actively involved in creating the fantasy, he's essentially bypassing any initial resistance she might have.
All right, so they've tested the waters, they've used guided fantasies to kind of break down those initial barriers, and then come the romantic questions, and these aren't your typical first date small talk.
No, these questions are designed to really elicit a woman's deepest desires and fantasies. They're looking for clues about what truly motivates her, what makes her tick.
And they even have this term called trans words, which are essentially the words and phrases that resonate most deeply with a woman on an emotional level.
It's about understanding her language of desire, figuring out what kind of words and imagery really spark something within her.
I gotta admit, some of the questions they use are pretty bold. They'll ask things like, what is it about me that makes you like me so much?
Yeah.
Or what could happen right now that would make you get incredibly turned on?
It's definitely a direct approach. But, they emphasize that it's crucial to establish a strong rapport before venturing into this territory. If you haven't built that trust and connection, these questions could easily backfire.
Right, you don't want to come across as creepy or pushy, but when done right, they believe these questions can lead to some pretty revealing and exciting conversations. It's all about creating that space for emotional openness and intimacy.
And it's not just about uncovering her desires. They're also trying to understand her values and how she views relationships. What kind of connection she's ultimately looking for.
Okay, now get ready for this next technique. It's called multimodal anchoring. And it's basically about creating these powerful sensory associations to make a lasting impression. It's like embedding himself in her memory through specific sights, smells, and touches.
Like a Pavlovian response, but for romance?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, one example they give is using eucalyptus oil on a woman's breasts, so she associates that scent with him. Another one is giving her a necklace and suggesting that it evokes the feeling of his embrace.
The goal is to create these anchors that will trigger those positive feelings and memories, even when he's not physically present. Whether you find it clever or a bit manipulative, it's definitely a fascinating approach to building a connection.
And these recordings are packed with even more techniques and insights. But before we dive into those, let's move on to part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll explore some of their more unconventional approaches, including something called the slow approach. All right, so we've delved into this world of testing, right? We've explored these crazy, vivid, guided fantasies. We even uncovered the power of multimodal anchoring. But these guys have even more tricks up their sleeves. And one of the things they talk about is something called the slow approach.
Yeah, the slow approach, it's kind of a fascinating contrast to some of the other techniques we've discussed, where it's like this whirlwind romance kind of thing. The slow approach is all about patience and subtlety and building familiarity over time.
So instead of going full speed ahead, it's more like a slow burn.
Exactly. It's about making these repeated, brief, and often humorous encounters over a period of weeks, sometimes even without revealing his romantic intentions right away.
So he's like this charming phantom that just kind of pops in and out of her life, leaves her with a smile and a sense of intrigue.
Precisely. The goal is to gradually create those positive associations and a sense of comfort before he even thinks about escalating the interaction.
And they give some pretty interesting examples of this in action, like one guy talks about just interacting with women at a bagel shop or a hair salon, just these quick, lighthearted exchanges over time. And another guy even used a classified ad to initiate contact.
Oh, wow, that's a really creative one. He placed an ad for a TV and a VCR, but his real goal was to connect with women who called. There's a bold way to generate leads.
Talk about thinking outside the box. But it's clear that these guys are just fascinated by understanding what makes women tick. They talk a lot about observing women's natural instincts, their typical responses to different situations.
Right, it's almost like they're trying to decode the female psyche, looking for patterns and predictable reactions.
So, for example, they'll observe how women react to unexpected events, like a ringing phone or a sudden change of plans. Or they'll study their behavior in specific environments, like airports or parties.
Right, they're even fascinated by the dynamics between women in a group, trying to understand those subtle power plays and social cues.
It's like they're constantly gathering data, trying to build this comprehensive understanding of how women operate in the world.
And while their methods might be a bit unorthodox, I think there's something to be said for, being more attuned to those subtle cues and behaviors in our own interactions.
Absolutely. Whether you're interested in seduction or simply want to be a better communicator, paying attention to those unspoken signals can be incredibly valuable.
Now, another important theme that emerges from these recordings is this idea of presenting a congruent package. They emphasize that your actions, your appearance, and your lifestyle should all align with the image you're projecting.
So if you're claiming to be a successful professional, but you show up with little money, or you talk about independence while living with your mom, that's going to send mixed signals.
Exactly. Those kinds of inconsistencies can really undermine your credibility and make it difficult to build trust.
It's like they're saying you need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Precisely. Authenticity is key. And while there's nothing wrong with presenting your best self, it's important to make sure that your actions are consistent with the image you're portraying.
Yeah, it makes you think about how much of attraction is based on genuineness. People can usually sense when someone is being fake or putting on a facade.
Right. And even if you're able to fool someone in the short term, those inconsistencies are eventually going to catch up with you.
Now, despite all their confidence and bravado, these guys are surprisingly candid about the reasons why seduction techniques fail. And some of their insights are actually pretty relatable, even if you're not trying to master the art of speed seduction.
Right. For example, they talk about the importance of putting a woman in the right emotional state. If she's not feeling receptive or open, your efforts are likely to fall flat.
Yeah. They also emphasize that your words need to match your body language. If you're saying one thing but your nonverbal cues are sending a different message, that incongruence can create confusion and distrust.
Right, and perhaps their most important insight is this need to adapt to a woman's responses. If you're not paying attention to her cues and adjusting your approach accordingly, You're basically shooting in the dark.
It's like they're saying seduction is a dance, not a monologue. You have to be responsive to your partner, not just focused on your own agenda.
And finally, they emphasize that you have to be willing to try. If you're not putting yourself out there, if you give up at the first sign of resistance,
Yeah.
you're never going to succeed.
It's like anything in life. You have to be willing to take risks, face rejection, and keep trying. Persistence and resilience are key.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that seduction at its core is about human connection. And that requires vulnerability, authenticity, and a willingness to step outside your comfort zone.
Okay, so we've talked about all these techniques for, getting a woman interested quickly. But what about what happens afterward? These guys, they don't just stop at the initial seduction. They actually talk about dealing with what they call post-trance regret.
Trans regret.
Yeah, basically it's the possibility that a woman might feel uncomfortable or even used after, sleeping with someone so quickly.
Right, it's an interesting acknowledgement that just because someone responds to these techniques doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely happy with, the speed or the intensity of the connection.
Exactly. There can be a disconnect between that initial attraction and long-term compatibility.
And they actually talk about specific techniques for mitigating those feelings of regret. One of the things they talk about is embedding what they call post-hypnotic suggestions.
Post-hypnotic suggestions. So like while she's still in that heightened emotional state, he's subtly planting ideas that will make her feel good about the experience, even after that initial intensity fades.
Right, it's like they're trying to preemptively address any doubts or guilt she might have later on.
And it's not just about, negating those negative feelings. It's also about building up those positive associations with the experience.
Okay.
So, for example, he might act surprised by how quickly the connection developed, emphasizing that it's a sign of a truly special bond.
So he might say something like, wow, it's amazing how quickly this is all happening. It's so rare to meet someone and feel this close this quickly.
Right. It's like he's turning the speed of the connection into a positive thing, a
Yeah.
testament to their undeniable chemistry.
Exactly. He's reframing that speed as a sign of destiny rather than, something to be ashamed of.
It's like they're saying, this is how real love starts. You just know.
What's up? And of course, this is where those multimodal anchors come back into play. Those scents, those touches, even their voices. They're all linked to those initial feelings of excitement and pleasure.
So if she starts to have any doubts later on, they can theoretically trigger those anchors and bring her back to that positive emotional space.
It's a fascinating blend of psychology and, let's call it strategic thinking.
But it's important to note that even though these guys are operating in this very specific context, the world of speed seduction,
Yeah.
I think their insights into human behavior have broader implications.
Well, absolutely. Their techniques might be unconventional, but those underlying principles of persuasion and influence and communication, they're relevant in all areas of our lives.
Whether we're aware of it or not, we're all constantly sending and receiving signals, trying to, create connections and influence the people around us.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to just be more observant of those subtle cues. Pay attention to how people react to your words and your actions. Notice the things that create those positive associations and the things that trigger those negative responses.
Because the more aware we are of those dynamics, the more effectively we can communicate and build relationships, both personal and professional.
And with that, we'll leave you to ponder this fascinating and sometimes unsettling world of speed seduction.
It's a good reminder that human interaction is a complex and often unpredictable dance.
But by understanding the steps, we can become more confident and skillful partners.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.